Okay, so instructions. Each color is represented by 3 numbers between the square brackets. Try changing numbers, running your code, and observing the result. You can always reset your code if you don't like the result. So let's start changing the numbers. Just going to change this to 200. This I'm going to change to 200. This to 177. This to 150. Maybe 160, 155, 140. Okay, so let's run that. Right, so that is the output. Not very visible. Okay, so change physics. Part of the power of coding is that small changes can create big impacts. Now, okay, so change the physics. Part of the power of coding is that small changes can create big impacts. Now that you've experimented with changing the color and text, it's time to experiment with animation itself. Instructions. 3 variables that you experiment with animation physics. Mouse response threshold, friction, and rotation force. Mouse response threshold affects how close the mouse pointer needs to be to affect the dots that make up the letters. The larger the number, the more powerful the effect of the mouse interaction. Experiment with changing the mouse response threshold to different numbers and running your code. Okay, so we're going to change the mouse response threshold to, for instance, 150. And I'm going to run that. Okay. So with 150, it's basically more responsive. So if it's not responsive enough, let me just try 350 and see what happens. Way more responsive. Okay, so number 2, try experimenting with the friction value. Whoa. It's going crazy. Let me put it back to 150. Going nuts. That's it. Okay. So number 2, try experimenting with the friction value. You'll probably want to keep friction between 0 and 1. Right, so I'm just going to change the friction value to 0.55. Let's run that. Okay. It's sort of, as you can see, it sticks to the same sort of pattern. Okay. That's pretty awesome. Something for the shorts. Okay, so number 3, finally try experimenting with rotation force value. This variable represents how much each animated dot will try to rotate when interacting with the mouse. Try keeping the value small, maybe around 0.01. So the message is change the physics. I'm just gonna put here. Thanks for watching. Okay, so let's say I'm going to change this rotational force to 0. You'll see there's no rotational force. Okay, so when I change this to 0, you'll see that the rotation force does not, allow the bubbles to rotate in any way. Friction, this variable controls how strongly the dots will try to return to their starting position. So if I change this friction now, and I run it, check that out. It's almost in slow-mo. Okay, so let me up the ante, put this back to 0.8. Okay, so now mouse response threshold is the sensitivity when I put the cursor over the bubbles. When I hover the cursor over the bubbles, the mouse response threshold is basically the amount of sensitivity to the cursor hovering over. So let me change this mouse response threshold to, for instance, 50. If I run that, you'll see it's much slower now, the response, and not as wide as it was. But if I change this to, for instance, 500, it's super sensitive, and check that out. It's just going haywire. If I change this to 100 and I run it, see. So if I change this to 150, for instance, and I run it, check that out. Super responsive. Okay.